person in the spotlight today is Ravi Venkatesan. Ravi is an outstanding Indian executive and old friend, so I'm honored to be with him today. Ravi, I know we can't see you, but I do hope we can hear you clearly.
Yeah, I can hear you very well, Anand.
Good. So let's start this session by, let me give you a quick potted version of Ravi's life. Ravi, as I said, one of the best known Indian managers that I can think of, an HBS alum, an IIT Bombay alum before that, a master's from Purdue. Like all Indians, he's just excelled in all the jobs that he's held. He first came to the limelight in India when he worked as the head of Cummins, which really took off as a company after Ravi joined it in the engineering business, and is a company that has a huge market share in India even today, and is very well known for not just its the quality of its engineering, but also for its local roots in the Pune region where I come from. And, Cummins is like a household word over there. After that, Ravi, I think a little bit to his own surprise, was tapped, I'm told, by Microsoft to come in and work for them as chairman and CEO of the company. At that point of time, as many of us remember, Microsoft was not making much inroads globally or in India. And much of the credit for building Microsoft in India as an organization and as a brand with distinct Indian characteristics must go to Ravi. So welcome, Ravi, and thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Anand, and hello to everyone. I'm in New York, and I really apologize that my camera isn't working.
And I must say, I can't help this, but I know Ravi is a Microsoft guy, and he should know how to work the technology, but it didn't quite work out today, so let's not hold that against him, okay? All right. So, Ravi, let's talk about the book, which is what you've dedicated your life to for the past, 3 years now. When I read the book, one of the first things that strikes me is that it flies in the face of, shall we say, Indian patriotism as well as conventional thinking, in the sense that compared to, let's say, the pre-1991 period, or even compared to the pre-2001 period, the general feeling amongst Indian consumers and even among Indian managers is the following, that, India is one of the BRICS. Multinational companies are just dying to invest in India. They are actually investing large sums of money. They're using it for outsourcing. They're getting more familiar with India. They want to come up with products that are tailored for the local market. Sure, Indian companies give them a lot of competition because India is not like China in the sense that we have had a vibrant private sector for over 100 years. But India is very much on the mental map of the multinational corporation. When I read the first 2-3 chapters of your book, I come away with a very different picture, where you're actually coming up with a very controversial, very challenging, very almost WikiLeaks-like assertion that actually multinational companies don't think much of India, aren't investing enough, and that they don't really seem to be getting it right in India. Since you worked with multinational companies at the top, and you're on the boards of several multinational companies, I'd love for you to explain, where do you get this data from? How do you come away with this impression?
That's a great question. So India is very much on the minds of most multinational companies, Anand, but largely still from the perspective of outsourcing. So India is a talent pool for IT engineering. That's a pretty well-established story, although many companies are still at the early stages of discovering and leveraging that. But India as an important market is what I've focused on in the book. And there, unfortunately, I think just about 1 or 2% of the 4,000 multinational companies that are operating in India at this point in time. have succeeded in making it an important, contributor of profits and their growth. And that's what really perplexed me and bothered me because, in spite of the fact that India is a difficult place to do business, there are some iconic names which have succeeded spectacularly. And why is it that more companies haven't followed suit? And clearly, when I began talking to CEOs of companies in the early stages of this research, and I would say,
Right.
hey, what do you think of India? How are you doing there? They all thought they were successful. Why? Because they have a presence in India. It's growing at double digits, which is faster than many other parts of the world, certainly the developed world. Or
Yep.
they say, hey, we have hit budget 3 years in a row, and that is success. So they had all these kinds of, rather pedestrian metrics of success. But then you actually take a look at how much does India contribute, and for most companies, it is significantly less than 1% of their profits and their revenues. And
Ravi, I just want to interrupt there. Less than 1% of their sales and profits.
correct. So for most companies, including exceedingly well-managed firms and greatly admired firms, Apple,
Right.
Caterpillar, Toyota, the Daimler Benz, you name any of them, India is 1% or less. And
Wow.
more importantly, when you look at their new growth, India is just about 5% of their new growth or less, which says that not only is it a current problem, if you extrapolate a decade or 2 decades, India
Right.
will still be an anemic contributor. And so for me, this seems a real pity. And it's a loss that would appear not only for the companies, it's also a loss for India because we are not getting as a country the kind of investment, the attention, the technology, the job creation that
Right.
the country so desperately needs.
Right.
So,
So perhaps that leads us to the next question. Is that the country's fault? Is it the way our policy, is it because of the fact that we don't formulate policy to attract enough of FDI, that we're, that our reforms sort of stop and stall and there's this cycle of growth and gloom and boom? Is it because of the fact that the regulatory environment in India has been kind of on, off, positive, now negative on the one hand, the corruption, the rising levels of that in Indian society, in Indian government, the scams that we hear about. And this is not me talking as a non-resident Indian. I mean, everybody in India tells me, people like you who live there, tell me that things have never been as bad as they are today. So is that our fault as Indians that multinational companies don't appear to take India as seriously as they do, say, China or Brazil or Russia?
yeah. No, I think India is clearly its own worst enemy. The reality is that with growth in the developed markets pretty sort of close to zero, even the US is just beginning to
Come out of it.
come out of it, and Europe and Japan clearly are in difficult times. Companies do look at emerging markets, and when you look at emerging markets, it's hard to not see the big giant out there called India.
Right.
So unlike most countries, the government of India doesn't have to do a lot to attract MNCs. What it has to do is stop scaring them away. And unfortunately, in the last 5 years, we have done a pretty good job scaring away multinational companies. And through all that combination of things, so extraordinary levels of corruption, which are only getting worse, not better, despite all the exposure. Very, very high levels of uncertainty of policies, FDI, on, off, harassment of every company by the tax authorities, bureaucracy, so even routine decisions taking, endless amount of time, let alone major decisions like setting up a power plant or whatever. So India has never been an easy place to do business, but in the last 4 or 5 years, it has become sort of spectacularly hard to do business. And so in the last decade, what happened was companies overlooked India in favor of China. Now the risk is to overlook India in favor of Indonesia or even Myanmar. And so yeah, to a very large extent, India is at fault. But that's not the only, I think, the only factor. The bigger problem is the multinational companies' own mindset. Because in the same chaotic environment, what was interesting to see is any number of companies that have done rather well. And it's across industries and from different geographies. So you take
Right.
a look at Samsung and Hyundai and LG from Korea. You take a look at companies like Volvo and Ericsson from Sweden. The German machinery companies and Siemens and ABB and L'Oreal and so
Right.
on from France and US-based companies like McDonald's and Cummins and
Yeah.
yeah. So you can't entirely blame the environment. In the same environment, some companies have broken through. So the
Right.
question becomes one of, hey, what did they do differently? And it turns out that their mindset and
Right.
therefore their actions are completely different. And that's given that most of the world, most emerging markets look a lot more like India than they do China with the same chaos and corruption and bureaucracy and so forth. It
Right.
seems like, hey, might as well learn to figure out how to operate in these environments in India and around the world. And chances are then you'll flourish. And that's what
Right.
I advocate in the book. Don't wait for India to become less chaotic. Learn to adapt to chaotic environments.
Right. So, Ravi, let's talk about a particular case. I mean, you and I are both familiar with the case method, and I think people would love to have an example. Um, do you have an example in the book which tells us about a particular company that operates in India and has done really well despite all the odds?
Yeah, well, it's always nice in talking to an audience like this, which may or may not be a hardcore business audience, to pick a consumer company. And one of the consumer companies I sort of studied hard and really liked was McDonald's.
Okay.
And for me, the case of McDonald's was interesting because, hey, here's a company that's, for years or decades has seen itself as a beef products company. They're the largest buyer and seller of beef in the world. And yet they come to India, which, for all its changes in dietary habits, is still pretty vegetarian. The cow is sacred. $1 or 60 rupees is still a ton of money for most
Absolutely.
people. And they figured out how to create one of the fastest growing restaurant chains in India and the world. How did they do it? And surely if McDonald's can make this breakthrough, it should be easier for industrial or other types of companies. And what was fascinating to me is how long-term a perspective they took. So, for instance, they decided pretty early that their menu in India would have to be local, and so they
Right.
set about creating a completely local menu, which I think a lot of our audience today would recognize. Things like paneer, salsa, wrap, and rather obscure things. The only
Right.
things common between an Indian McDonald's menu and the U.S. one is fries and French fries and Coca-Cola and maybe some shakes. But what they then discovered is, holy cow, even something as basic as the potato to make fries, the Indian
Right.
potato doesn't lend itself. And so they
Right.
had to hire agronomists to figure out how to grow, a decent potato in India. And that took them a number of years to create a supply chain for these things, for iceberg lettuce and all that. It took take them 8 years. How to figure out how to make money at a median price point of 25 rupees, which is what your Happy Meals menu is, took them quite a long time. So it took 9 years before they figured out how to make the economics work. And in this 9 years, they've spent over $100 million.
Oh,
How many companies would be willing to take a, nearly a decade-long perspective, invest patiently,
right.
completely localize not only the menu and offering, but also the business model and the go-to-market? So I think
Right.
there were some really wonderful lessons here for all companies when you look at the McDonald's thing, and eventually it pays off. That's the really nice thing.
Right. So, Ravi, extrapolating from the McDonald's case, if you look at it from the perspective of the Western multinational that wants to do well in India, what are the criteria that it should use to measure success in India going forward, today and tomorrow? And what are the key success factors that it needs to, the competencies that it needs to grow to be able to get to where it should be going?
That's a great question. As I said, many multinational companies, they'd have an internal definition of success. Hey, India is doing great. They met budget or they grew double digit. They don't look around and say, oh, there's that Indian competitor who grew 50%. We handed out big bonuses for 11%.
Right.
So
Right.
it has to be a market-based definition of success. And a market-based definition of success, number one is, hey, are you a leader? Are you number one or two in the Indian industry? And are you growing faster than anyone else? That's a pretty
Yeah.
good metric. A second one is, how much of your global growth is coming from India versus China versus everywhere else? And typically, given 5% GDP growth in India, $2 trillion economy, India should be contributing at least 10%, if not 15%, of the new growth of a company on a global basis in most industries. It's not true for all industries. So that's pretty good. And finally, I would say, how is India contributing in other ways to the success of the company across the world? The subtitle of the book is, hey, win in India, win everywhere. So to what extent are the products and services developed for India being taken to other parts of the world like Africa or Southeast Asia and beginning to do well? To what extent is the company using India as a place to grow global talent, and so on and so forth? So those would be pretty good metrics of success. And
Right.
obviously it's aspirational. Now, what does it take to get there? I
Oh,
think
Ravi, can I just stop you for 1 minute before you
yeah.
go there? Yeah. So, Ravi, this bit about developing innovations in India for other emerging markets or even for the developed world, reverse innovation, as we call it. It's a fascinating idea. Do you see it really being part of multinational companies' agenda in India?
I think for a small number of companies who have seen the light, it is incredibly important. Incredibly
Okay.
important. So, for instance, take GE's healthcare business.
Okay.
I think they tinkered around for a while, and then they came up with these low-cost X-ray and ECG machines,
Right.
and that more publicity internally and externally for a while. But
Yeah.
now that has become a proof of
Proof of.
concept,
Yeah.
and they see that in category after category they can in fact use India and the engineering talent in India to come up with dramatically low cost, more affordable offerings, and take
Right.
them. Hey, why just to emerging markets? You can take it to inner cities in the United States where the same
Exactly.
economic pressures are
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
So I would hesitate to say multinational companies as a whole are seeing it, but I think you see companies like Unilever, Cummins, JCB, GE,
Yep.
Samsung clearly embracing that and pouring more and more commitment and resources into that kind of innovation.
Cool.
And yeah, so that's. But I'm happy to go back to your original question. So what does
Right.
it really take from a
Yep.
mindset perspective? The
Yep.
most important, see, operating like McDonald's did is so unnatural for most multinational companies. Most don't even go there. What are you saying? Hey, ignore the chaos, look past the chaos of India, and bet on the billion people out there, the young people, and their energy and aspirations and the talent.
Yep.
It takes a pretty,
Stuff.
ironclad stomach to be able to do that.
Yep.
Oh, take a 10-year view of investments. Chances are some of these investments won't pay back for, at least 5 years, probably a decade. Hey,
Yep.
if you're the CEO of a US corporation, your tenure is now down to 6 years. So you're
Right.
saying, I'm going to take this big risk, and
Right.
if it pays off, my successor is going to look like a hero. Forget it.
Right. Right.
I'd rather focus on lower hanging fruit.
Yeah, I can see
Oh,
that. Yep.
another big criterion. Don't staff it based on the size of the business with a junior sales guy.
Right.
Look at the size of the opportunity and send one of your most senior, most capable managers. Somebody who reports to the executive leadership team.
Right.
That's pretty unnatural too. Oh, by the way, do R&D in India for India, develop crazy products at affordable prices, and oh, by the way, if you're lucky and successful, they may disrupt your model back home.
Right.
So, this is pretty scary and unnatural for most companies. So unless the CEO of the company usually sees this and says, "Wow, if I don't embrace it and my competitor embraces it before
Right.
we do, this is a serious problem. So we better go out there," and he or she forces the organization to march into India and China ahead
Yeah.
of time and really takes this long-term view. It ain't going
Right.
to happen. And that's the problem for Western multinational companies. It's a pretty exceptional
Who does?
CEO, an architect, called the globalizer who does this. Most of them are happy to, their experience base is in the developed market and they tend to tinker around with the emerging markets and so forth.
Right.
So that's the fundamentally the stumbling block on it.
Okay. So let's flip this a little bit. I understand that it's headquarters, culture. Hey, Bayo, you have something?
Hi.
Yeah.
I know you can see me and not the audience, but we're
Yeah.
just, we have a few questions after the question that you've
Sure.
asked Mr. Venkatesan. So once
Yep.
you're done with the question, I'd just like to, we have a couple of questions from the audience as well as our
Let's go for it.
So is that okay?
Fine, let's go for let's go for it. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you the first Twitter contest question from our side. I'm sorry you have to see me and not the audience, but
No, that's fine.
why global leaders don't put special focus on India versus China? Is it because of language, infra, or economic ranking? It's by Mr. Muthu Ranganathan. He's one of our Twitter followers. And the question's to Mr. Venkatesan.
Yeah, hey, hi Muthu. It's a great question because it sort of rankled me pretty hard that my counterparts in China would get so much more attention and investment in all the companies that before. But it's pretty obvious what's going on. You've got a Chinese economy that is 5 times as large and also growing faster than India. So just economics alone says China is the largest market for everything, whether it's for cars or personal computers, mobile phones, you name it, any category, China is the largest market. It's also a more affluent market. When you look at the spending power and the income distribution or the income pyramid, China is far ahead. So multinationals, follow the money, and therefore it's pretty obvious that they would go to China first. The real interesting question is why not China and India? Because that's really the right answer. It's not China or India. And the answer to that is pretty much what I talked about in response to Anand's first question, which is self-inflicted wounds. We present a pretty terrifying picture to somebody who doesn't know the country and hasn't been exposed to emerging markets. So,
Right.
I mean, terrible infrastructure, which is apparent the moment you land in the country, to the fact that our business environment is hostile. It turns out to be equal opportunity hostile to Indian businesses as well as multinational.
Nationals, yep.
But it's hostile nevertheless. So companies say, this is too tough, man. Let's go to some, easier place. And today, easier places appear to be parts of Africa, Indonesia, etc. My own articulation is that's a mistake because India is this sort of archetype or litmus test for emerging markets. And if you can't succeed here, chances are you're going to run into all the same problems in other markets. But that's, I think, the simple answer for why China and not India. And by the way, it's also the herd mentality. Everybody's going to China, so I better go to China. When everybody starts coming to India, they'll all...
I will come. Yeah.
We have another question from an audience member. We'll just check if he can, if Mr. Venkatesan or Mr. Anand can hear you.
Yeah.
We can hear you. Yeah.
You can hear Payal.
No, mine is actually, again, a very general question. And the question is, actually, India is not seen as a very strong innovation center for global companies as well as Indian companies. And the innovations that happen are not very, leapfrogging. They are only incremental innovations. Whereas India, if you are talking of win in India and win everywhere, that incremental innovation concept has to go, and actually that innovation has to work out from here. And I personally feel it should not be called as a reverse innovation. It is innovation. It cannot be a reverse innovation just because it is not based out of the headquarter. An MNC concept should always be it can innovate in any market and then put it out to other markets. So reverse innovation, I would believe as a common sense, would be seeing a competitor and working backwards. Whereas this is not, I'm not talking of that. I'm just changing the market and saying that why India is not a hotbed of innovation for new products.
Yeah, first of all, I never liked the term reverse innovation either, but for some reason it has caught on. So, so it is what it is. To your question, our game-changing innovations coming out of India, whether from Indian companies or multinational? The answer is there are a few. Most of them are coming from Indian companies. So the global delivery model in IT outsourcing was a game changer. It came out of several firms. The model of low-cost telephony, the ability of cell phone operators to make money even at 1 cent a minute or whatever, was again another game changer. You can talk about Tata Nano, while it has not made the market on fire, but it appears to be more a marketing issue rather than a product innovation thing. It was a global game changer. It's got every car company around the world thinking differently. And then you have the older examples of Arvind Eye Hospital and so forth. There are a few. The question is, for a country with 1.2 billion people, so many smart ones, so many urgent pressing problems, is this enough? And the answer is clearly no. And so somehow Indian companies have been reluctant so far, for the most part, with a few exceptions like the Tatas and whatnots, to invest much in R&D and innovation. There's been enough of an easy market just without doing it the hard way. And as I said, multinational companies are only now beginning to see India as a lab for innovation. So I think we're in the maturity continuum in some early stage. Hopefully we'll see hit an S-curve soon. And maybe my book might be a little bit of a tiny catalyst to do that. That's what I'm hoping anyway.
Let's hope so.
We have another question again.
Well, actually, this is with regards to Walmart and Tesco. I've read reports that they'll be opening in India, rather. So, this can be construed as a boon, or maybe even bane for the local, guys. So, what are your views on that? Walmart and Tesco coming to India.
Well, it's very interesting because I recently, or a couple of months ago, I had the opportunity to interview one of the great economists, Nobel Prize-winning guy called Joe Stiglitz. He had come to Bangalore, and so I was talking to him, and he said, I'm not sure why India needs Tesco or Walmart. Okay, just speaking from an economic perspective, because what do they bring? They bring capital. Well, there are plenty of Indians that have capital. They bring know-how. Again, Indian companies have the ability, they've shown in industry after industry the ability to assemble know-how. So what is it that they are bringing that an Indian company, whether Reliance or Tata or any of the good ones, cannot? So if Indian companies haven't invested in modern, large format retail, then maybe the industry itself there's something that is unattractive about that business yet. And if you don't fix that, just throwing open FDI to foreign companies like Walmart isn't going to solve a whole lot. And that's exactly what's happened. Even after the government has okayed it and said, you just need to get state by state approval, but it's open for business, nobody's really rushed in yet. So I think the challenges in India are fundamentally to do with figuring out a business model that makes large format retail competitive, right? You look at India, the cost of real estate is more expensive than the US. The cost of energy is more expensive than the US. Labor adjusted for productivity is about the same. But the per square foot sales is about 1/10. So finding a way to make money in large format retail is completely non-trivial. So I don't know that these guys are necessarily going to sweep aside local shopkeepers. I think the reality is India is going to have a mixed model of what is called cash and carry wholesalers, like Metro. And the smaller shopkeepers, in fact, buy from them, and large customers buy from them. So you're probably going to end up with a very hybrid model, and rather than the large-scale job losses that are feared. But we'll see. I'm not sure I'm an expert enough. Anand, do you have any views?
I actually believe that it's a good idea to get these companies in. It removes a kind of, flashpoint. Multinationals, will choose the one thing that we don't allow them to do in India and say that, because of this, we're not coming to India. So I think it removes that last hurdle. Two, I think when it comes to logistics, as you yourself pointed out from the McDonald's example, there is a lot to be done in terms of developing our supply chain, our cold storage, our just-in-time delivery. I think we can squeeze costs out of the system if we have foreign know-how and technology. So I'm not per se against getting IKEA.
Can you? I'm sorry, just give us another minute.
Hi, we're back.
Hi.
The call
Yeah.
dropped.
Yeah.
Any more questions, Payal?
So we have.
Payal, can you hear us?
Okay. Sorry.
I don't think they can hear
No,
us.
I can hear you. I can hear you. We have two
Okay.
more questions, one and another Twitter contest question. So I'll hand it over to the audience member once and then another last question. I'm sorry, we're running low on time.
Oh, okay. Just let us know when we have 2 minutes, okay?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah, okay, just a continuation of the retail format discussion that was happening. I think just as you rightly said, perhaps a good idea would be a retail hybrid model, taking the learnings of the telecom industry and applying it on the retail, because telecom has used a lot of small shop formats and have leveraged the presence and increased its network to the nooks and corners of the country. So instead of thinking of an either-or model for the large format versus small format, why don't we use the small formats as a hub and spoke model, where the large format centers in one particular place and the small formats are franchisees of the big ones, and then leverage the entire retail distribution of the country and then use it. So there's no job loss, there's no nothing. We just use what we have and then we build on what we want to make.
Yeah, well, it turns out that through a nice coincidence, three of the largest guys are in both businesses. Bharti is in telecom and retail, so is Reliance, and so are the Tatas. So hopefully they have the opportunity to, transfer learning across their businesses. But
Right.
I think your point is valid. People have to try out different formats and see what works and what doesn't, and then scale the successes. And that's probably the mode they're in right now.
Our last question from Pallavi Kamath. Despite the often highlighted problems of doing business in India, most companies make a beeline here. Why?
Good.
Well, I don't know about beeline. I want to see more of a hive out here. But the attractions of India are undeniable. Okay, 1.2 billion people, slowly getting wealthier, incredibly young, huge appetite for consumption. Oh, by the way, English is still a very familiar language. So unlike China and certain other places, you can actually have conversations without that barrier. The fact that it is a democracy, even if a chaotic one, gives some tummy comfort, I think, to multinationals, that there won't be unilateral actions with no recourse.
Right.
So, and it's the last of the big markets. Even if you look at, in
Africa.
African countries, even as a continent, they only begin to compare in size to us. So it's the large untapped frontier out there. So these are all good reasons. And then, so I would say, that's why I said in the beginning, India doesn't have to do a whole lot to go out and sell itself and attract companies. We've just got to stop driving them away.
Right.
That's all from our end. So we have about 2 minutes left.
Okay, good. So Ravi, I'm going to ask you a question which we probably haven't dealt with in the book or outside there in the book, but I'm sure you can answer it. So you talk a lot about talent in the Indian context. If I were a young, which I am not anymore, manager in a multinational corporation that is operating in India, what should I be doing to ensure that my company and I succeed in the Indian context?
Great question. I would have said, what should the country manager do to succeed? But if I'm just a young person in somewhere in the organization,
let's say, let's say you're leading.
Well, one of the things that multinational companies really do prize is predictability. Mm-hmm. So, particularly as they go into these faraway places, they just really are spooked by, surprises and variability. So I would say number one thing is try and do your job in a consistent fashion. That itself is pretty good. Number two, I would build bridges. I would get to know people in other parts of the world, particularly at headquarters, and get to know us not just over email and so forth, but build social networks across the corporation. A third thing is one of the best thing about a multinational company is that it's multinational. So I would say at some pretty early stage, get out of India, go to another country, to a country that's very different culturally from our own, and go out and try and really sort of hit the ball out of the park out there, and also get to see India from the outside in. So those are some things I would perhaps do if I were 25 years old.
Excellent. I think that's great. And
I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Payal.
Since we started late, I'm going to squeeze in one more question from the audience member.
Sure.
Hello. Yeah, we have seen of late a trend where a lot of corporations are having large cash balances on the balance sheet, and still funding happens to these particular players. So what, in a sense, we are doing is we are building financial instruments or financial assets rather than creating productive assets. And this is not good for the job creation as well, because the money is getting channelized somewhere. So what kind of policy reforms or you think would be required for us to channelize this money wherein some productive assets are created and it leads to creation of jobs?
Yeah, well, the way I would answer it is I think the government has to sort of really do some navel gazing or looking in the mirror and do a whole bunch of reforms that are necessary for just industrial activity and job creation. That's one. The issue of companies hoarding cash is very much an issue for their shareholders and their boards. So I don't think that the government should step in and legislate anything around the use of cash. But I think what we are seeing is a lot of shareholder activism in all parts of the world, not just in India, not just in the US, for companies that don't have great uses for cash to return them to their shareholders. So, money needs to flow. Money should not be hoarded. And I sort of very much agree with the sentiment behind your question. But I think the cash balance is a company and board and shareholder issue.
Good. Payal? Any more questions?
No, that's all, sir. I wanted to thank yourself and Mr. Venkatesan. And a round of applause from our audience, please.
Yes, especially for Ravi, whom we couldn't see and who couldn't see us. So, Ravi, thank you very much for doing this in the dark.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to mention that Anand, in addition to all his other accomplishments that Payal read out, also happened to be the guy who forced me to write the book and was the editor of the book. So you can also give a round of applause to my friend Anand. Thank you.
We can give a round of applause to that too, yes. We usually give away a token of our appreciation, but I'll have to just say thank you from Mr. Bagrodia and from Leapwalt, and thank you so much for being there. Thank you, sir.
I appreciate the opportunity. Bye.
Bye.
Yeah, Bye. Thanks, Ravi. Thank you very much. Yep.